This is the WealthAbility for CPAs show. Better clients, better practice, better life. Here's Tom Wheelwright.
As CPAs, we're called more and more by our clients for discussions about not just tax, but what are the economic considerations of any type of investment. Now, it's not our job to give financial advice. However, I think it's a mistake if we don't understand the economics of any investment our client is getting into, especially those that have huge tax benefits. Because what happens is we tend to focus on the tax benefits. The clients get all excited about the tax benefits, but do they understand the risks and how the investment actually works? Today, we're going to talk about an investment that I would never have thought 30 years ago would be considered controversial, but today it is, and it's oil and gas. Oil and gas has been the driver of the economic engine of the world for over 100 years. Now it's got all sorts of negatives being talked about as far as the climate and climate change. And do we go to electric vehicles? What do we do about climate change? So we're here to talk about really what we're going to see in oil and gas and the pros and the cons of oil and gas investing, besides the tax consequences. We'll talk about that briefly. But I really want to focus on oil and gas as an investment because we have clients who are interested in this type of investment. And we have with us today a leader in the oil and gas field by the name of John Engel. John is with Gulf Coast Western, a very prominent oil and gas drilling and development company. And John, it is great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
And John, if you would, just give us a little of your background. I know you're an oil man here.
Yeah, so Gulf Coast Western, to begin with, is a Dallas-based, we're headquartered in Dallas, oil and gas exploration firm, venture capital firm. We were formed in 1970. Our specialty is we put together joint venture general partnerships with the main goal is to go out and form a joint venture around a group of wells, to drill those wells and place those wells into production and receive the revenues that an oil well can generate for our partners.
So right now, oil's in the news. It's in the news negatively and positively. And if you could tell us just right this minute, okay, so oil's been up over 100 in the last couple of years, and it's down hovering around 75 right now. So one of the big challenges, of course, one of the big risks with oil, unlike say real estate where rents don't tend to fluctuate wildly within a short period of time, oil and gas, sometimes the price does fluctuate pretty wildly. So can you tell us kind of the state of the oil industry right now?
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly can. And to your point, just a few years ago, we saw it dip down to negative $38, which none of us ever could have seen coming. It was purely an options play and a contracts expiration deal that happened on that day. It was for one day, but it was not fun to watch and not fun to be a part of. At the same time, we've seen it go up to, upwards of $125 recently. So yes, the fluctuations are there. Oil is the most important commodity on the planet. There are over 6,000 products made from oil and gas, and we use it on a daily basis. So yeah, but that being said, everything is supply and demand driven. When COVID hit, supply was there and demand stopped, and that's where we saw those negative $38 prices. Now we've got, at the same time, you had OPEC trying to basically price out the shale drillers in America, basically tried to put them out of business and almost succeeded. But what they realized, what the shale companies realized was we better get real efficient and real fast. And so they did. They went through a huge downsizing of their corporations and their drilling operations, but they maintained and kept their key personnel, their top, their cream of the crop personnel, they kept. And so they figured out really quick how to get very efficient in the shale drilling. At the same time, Saudi Aramco went public, and they need probably in the range of a $90 price target. So now we're working with the Saudi Aramco and OPEC, trying to keep oil prices elevated, where before they were trying to price out the American oil industry. So now the American oil industry is highly efficient. They have not rushed out and increased their drilling operations just because oil prices went up to $95. You saw a small uptick in drilling operations, but they didn't just go full bore, because they've run into that problem before, and they're not going to be caught with their pants down again.
So what's going on? We know that OPEC keeps talking about reducing the amount they drill, and we have Russia who's funding a war with their drilling. We have China in desperate need, but their economy seems to be faltering. So what do you see over the next 6 months? Let's take a short-term time horizon. What do you see over the next 6 months with oil demand and oil supply?
Well, that's a good question. I think overall we're going to see it kind of hover in this $70 to $90 range. You have, for every big brokerage house that calls for it to be $105, there's probably just as many that call for $65. So it's supply and demand. Everything is so news driven right now. If there's a positive news article, the oil prices shoot up. If there's a negative, China's demand goes down, you'll see prices drop, $3, $4, $5 in a day. And what I tell my partners is, look, it's going to fluctuate, but it's probably going to be, considering it's been down to 65 and it's been up to 95. I'm comfortable with it being in the $75 range for quite some time. If it goes up over 100, great, but I don't count on it being above 100 and sustaining that level. At the same time, when it drops down below 70, I'm not overly concerned, because one thing is certain on oil prices, they're going to change. And today China might be having a negative. They might have crude oil inventories building because their economy, or they're going through a pandemic or a flu outbreak. Any one of those things, sure, it can impact the oil prices, but it's not going to stay at that level. One thing is certain here: the world population is growing. It has grown exponentially over the last 100 years, and it may be slowing down, but it is always increasing. And all of those people, and you're talking about a lot of undeveloped countries that are just now getting to being able to be developed. And there's a lot of countries that have a lot of oil that they're starting to discover. So those countries are going to start using it as well. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. And one other point I think everybody needs to understand, you alluded to the negative connotation that oil has. Everyone needs to understand that the oil and gas was put in the ground by Mother Nature millions and millions of years ago. It is a naturally occurring substance. It is trying to get to the surface, and in some places in the world, it just oozes right out of the ground naturally. Where Pennzoil was formed, because in a place called Oil Creek, Pennsylvania, the oil flowed directly into a stream. And if the greenies, I call them greenies, there's nothing wrong with wanting clean air and clean water. But when you look at what we used to do, we used to burn whale oil in lamps, to light our homes. So the whale population is doing great because of oil and gas. And again, there's 6,000 products made from oil and gas.
So let me ask you a question. So let me a question on this. Okay. So let's say it says there are several states and even countries that their goal is to eliminate gas-powered vehicles. What percentage of oil consumption is gasoline-powered vehicles or diesel-powered vehicles?
Oh, I'd be making up a number if it gave you a percentage, but the overwhelming majority is gas. And you touched on a key point there, the diesel operations. America is fed by farmers who drive huge diesel pickups and diesel trucks and diesel tractors. And most of the fertilizer that is used to fertilize those fields and feed America and the world comes from oil and gas and petroleum products. A lot of people don't know that. So if you were to cut off and just convert everything over to electric vehicles, that's fine. But you're still going to need oil and gas, and it's not going to happen overnight. You cannot have an electric vehicle without oil and gas and petroleum products.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess that was my question is, oil is used in over 6,000 products. The product that most people are aware of course, is gasoline and diesel fuel. And it's the one that seems to be the target of the green energy coalition. And, and I'm a green energy fan, by the way. I've got to admit, I have solar on my house. I have cars, some electric, some gas powered. And I'm a big fan of cleaning up the environment. That said, I do wonder if, as predicted, California, other big states, and then you have countries, Europe is really going heavily into the electric car, that they are really pushing heavy on that. You see that on every street corner, there are billboards all over the place. I was there just last month. And if you take all those all those gas powered vehicles out of the economy, do you have you looked at this? What kind of a percentage drop in demand would that cause?
Oh, it would be significant, probably 40%.
Okay.
Because just using basic, the basic math of a barrel of oil is 42 gallons. 40% of it goes to making gasoline. 60% of it goes to making everything else we use on a daily basis. So there would be, and to that point, I'm all for green energy. I'm one of the biggest proponents of nuclear energy you'll ever find, because that is the most efficient way to power our cities. And in so doing, California can switch today to all electric cars because they do silly mandates like that. But at the same time, they're telling people turn off your AC because we can't power everyone. So if you're going to convert to an all electric vehicle world, you better get used to being friendly with nuclear energy. And here's why: don't put it in a on the San Andreas Fault. Don't put it in a tsunami zone. Put it in Nebraska or somewhere where there's very little in the way of natural disasters, and you can power the world with nuclear energy. We can put it on submarines and we can put it on aircraft carriers, which are floating targets for all of our adversaries, but we can't power our cities with it. I think that's just silly. But yes, you're going to have oil and gas even long after everything is converted to electric.
Right. It's interesting though. So it does sound like eventually we will see a lower demand for oil. I mean, the reality is that the governments are putting trillions of dollars into the production of electric vehicles. Certainly hybrid vehicles have had a huge impact on the use of oil. I'm a huge fan of hybrid vehicles getting 50, 60 miles to the gallon instead of 20. I think that's a huge improvement to our cities, particularly, that's what we see. So given that, it sounds to me it's really about a timeline. So it's right now, oil's in high demand. In 10, 15 years from now, it may be in lower demand. So it seems to me like you do have to always look at what the market is at any one time. And again, the reason we're talking about this on the CPA show is because our clients are interested in this, and they tend to get interested because of the tax benefits, which we probably ought to cover pretty quick here, because the tax benefits are significant, and they have been significant for many, many, many years. They have we have presidents that have had the elimination of those tax benefits in their budgets every single year. President Obama did for 8 years. President Biden has. for his every budget he's proposed has proposed eliminating those tax benefits, and yet they remain a part, frankly, of our economic existence. So let's talk about, but this is why we're talking about oil and gas. Let's talk about the tax benefits real quick. And what I want to explain is, John, I'll talk about what the tax benefit is, but I want you to explain what the terminology means. Okay. So the big tax benefit in oil and gas is intangible drilling costs. Can you, and intangible drilling costs basically are 100% deductible. And they're deductible even before you spend the money, which is a really interesting concept, as long as you spend it within a certain period of time. So let's start with, explain what are intangible drilling costs.
So intangible drilling costs are exactly that. They're intangible, meaning it's all of the activities involved in drilling an oil well, placing an oil well into production, doing what needs to be done to place that well into production. So those are all of the intangibles. And it is by and far the most expensive part of drilling an oil well. If you've ever had the opportunity to go to an oil well, or oil wells as they're drilling them now, they literally come out and they build a small city around a bunch of holes in the ground. And they stay there until the wells are in production, and then they move everything off. It is a tremendous undertaking, from the first bulldozer showing up and starting to clear the pad. All of those things go into your intangible drilling costs. And as a participant in an oil and gas project, a working interest participant, you are, as you are aware, able to write off the majority of those costs in the year that those costs are incurred.
Right. So these are costs that under normal accounting rules and tax rules would be capitalized. And what we're doing is we're deducting what percentage. So if it takes, let's say you had I know this is a small one, but let's say you had a $10 million oil well, what percentage of those costs would be intangible drilling costs?
Oh, I'd say approximately 75 to 80% of it.
Okay. And I mentioned that we have this we have this odd rule where we can actually deduct it. We can deduct the oil and the intangible drilling costs even before they're actually incurred. Can you explain that rule? Because this is why we always see oil projects, they get promoted in November, December, because as long as they drill by a certain period in the next year, you still get the intangible drilling costs this year. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Yeah. So on a project, let's say we put together a project where the oil wells, like you're just mentioning, in December, I put together a project. So long as activity starts toward the drilling of those wells by March 31st of the following year, the tax advantages are locked in on the intangible drilling costs. So, I mean, and that can be a bulldozer showing up and putting in a culvert. Activity has started. So that's the key. And that's one of my biggest job duties, is when I put together a project, is to make sure that I'm putting together a project where activity is slated to start drilling before March 31st, or at least some activity to take place, so that our partners' tax advantages are protected.
Great. Okay. So we have what's interesting is we have this, let's say it's 80%, but the rest of it is, for the most part, most of it's equipment, correct?
Right.
And that equipment would be subject to bonus depreciation.
Correct.
So for example, in 2023, that would be 80% of the remainder. Of course, we don't get that until it's placed in service. So that's probably the next year, right? Yep. If it's a December project, it's probably the following year. But what that means is that there's a very large deduction as a percentage of the investment the first year. And there's still another deduction in year two. By year three, hopefully by year two, we're actually producing income, and we actually have revenue coming out of the ground. But we also have, of course, percentage depletion. Can you kind of walk us through what is percentage depletion?
Yeah. So on an oil well, because it is a naturally occurring substance, and it is naturally going to be depleted over time, There's only a finite amount of oil you can get out of every oil well. So because of that, the government gives you a depletion allowance, which allows for 15% of the revenue generated from an oil well is tax-free. So it's tax-free income over time, but if a well generates a partner $1 million over time, that's $150,000 in tax-free income. So it may seem like a small percentage, but over time it can work out to a lot of tax-free income depending on how big of a position a partner takes.
You're listening to WealthAbility for CPAs not just because Tom Wheelwright is entertaining, but to become a better strategic tax advisor. Attorney John Scabland and his law firm, Scabland PLLC, presents with Tom Wheelwright to accountants and works with tax advisors throughout the United States, implementing strategic tax plans that protect the client's assets. Take your expertise and client value to another level by working with John. Tax professionals rave about John's approach to asset protection. John enables your client to start small and increase the complexity of their plan as their assets grow. John will custom tailor a plan that is both affordable and effective. John Scabland is your asset protection attorney who will work with your tax strategy and within your client's budget. Go to ultimateassetprotection.com and schedule a time to meet with John.
Right. Now, one of the questions I think people have when they're investing in oil is you mentioned it. It is depleting. So unlike real estate doesn't tend to disappear, but the oil will eventually disappear. And now we do primarily horizontal drilling, which the other term for it, which is again not popular in the world right now, is fracking, and that means that we get a lot more oil, but we also get a lot faster. Correct?
Yes, we get the way fracking works, and since we're talking about it, fracking, all it does have a negative connotation, mainly due to a movie that was called Gasland, where they were, again, if you look back at the fact that oil and gas is a naturally occurring substance trying to get to the surface, in some areas, if you drill a water well and you have a gas reservoir that is shallow, you can tap into that gas reservoir and you may be able to light your faucet on fire because you're having gas bubbles in your water supply from your well, but it's a naturally occurring substance. When in the oil industry, the first thing they do when they drill the surface casing is they set it in concrete to protect the water table. So that is where fracking started to get its bad rap. If all fracking is it is injecting high pressure water and sand into an oil well to create microfractures in the rock, which is typically, in the case of a lot of our wells, 7 to 10 or 15,000 feet below the surface of the earth. And it's not reaching out very far, and you're maybe reaching 10, 15 feet max out into a formation. So it is not, it is, all it's intended to do is create microfractures so that the reservoir that is locked in tight rock is allowed to flow freely to the wellbore. The sand that's included in the frac water is there to work like the timbers in a mine shaft. So they go in, it's injected at high water, the water pressure creates fractures in the rock. The sand, when the water is pulled off, holds those cracks open so that the water and the gas can flow out of the reservoir. Are there chemicals involved? Absolutely, but most of the chemicals that are involved are there. It's maybe a 5% solution, and it's mainly designed to hold that sand in suspension, because on a 2-mile lateral, if I mix sand and water and send it down into a wellbore 2 miles long, that sand's just going to fall out of suspension and I'm going to have a wellbore full of sand. So the chemicals that are used are designed to hold that sand in suspension so it goes out into the formation and it's left there when the water is pulled back off. So that's why fracking has a bad connotation, is it's really because people don't understand it. Just like many things that we're afraid of, if you don't understand it, it sounds scary, but it's really a simple process. It's the most expensive process of the horizontal wells is the completion process, where they perforate and they frack the wells. But that's what makes these horizontal wells so successful. The government put the tax advantages in place for oil and gas exploration because it is very risky. If you go out looking for oil, you can have the best geologist in the world, and he can be wrong like a weatherman can be wrong. And I've seen it happen. So because you're taking that risk as an investor to go out and find and promote and build our own, U.S. national energy independency, you're taking that risk as an investor in the hopes of finding oil. When you're exploring for oil, you might have a 30% success rate. You can have all the best technology in the world, but Mother Nature can still throw a wrench in your gears. Where we drill and where we focus now is on these field development plays, horizontal drilling only, because we will only drill in blanket formations where the oil is proven to be there. But those same tax advantages apply because there's still a risk. There's still a mechanical risk. Now, the engineers are brilliant and they've mitigated a lot of those. So we have a tremendous success record because we're not exploring for oil, but we still get all the tax advantages and pass those on to our investors.
So let me ask you a question. So in a typical horizontal drilling situation, what percentage of the oil comes out year 1, year 2, year 3?
Because the wells are fracked, the majority, the bulk of the highest pressures are when you first place the well online. So in a horizontal well, which you will typically see is a production incline reaching a plateau, and this could be, I've seen wells have a 6-month incline in production. And then they'll plateau for 2 or 3 months. So that's your peak production. And from there, from that peak, you will see a decline curve start. And that decline, in some cases, can be precipitous. In other cases, it can be long and gradual. And that's what the engineers hope for, is a long, gradual decline curve. And at some point, it'll level out and have a nice, consistent production rate for years and years, all under its own pressure. So don't let anyone misguide you. Every single oil well, back to that depletion allowance, in most wells that aren't fracked, your best day of production is going to be that first day of production. When the well is first perforated, that's when the pressures are the greatest. And from that point on, it's going to decline over time. On a horizontal well that has been fracked, that water weight has to come off the formation that was put into the well to create the microfractures. All of that water weight has to come back off the formation. As that water weight comes off the formation, you'll start to see more and more oil and gas produced. And that is what drives that incline curve to that plateau. And then your decline starts from a peak of production. So that's one of the things that we really like about these wells. The bulk of the returns are going to be in the first 5 to 7 years. The major bulk of the returns is going to be in year 1 and year 2.
Okay.
But that being said, much like real estate, when I design a project, it is designed to get the partners their return on investment, make them whole within 2 years. If everything works accordingly and oil prices cooperate and the wells cooperate, that's how I design them. But the wells will produce for decades. So in a lot of cases, they become heirloom investments that are paying, the heirs and sometimes grandkids for 20 and 30 years down the road. So it's a nice way of taking a small portion of someone's portfolio, putting it to work for them. A lot of it was going to be going to the government anyway. Especially our partners who live in California with a high state income tax. I joke with them, they're working in a lot of cases to mid-July, for the government before they ever start making money for their family. But it's a way of them taking just a portion of that money and putting it to work for them. And in some cases, seeing revenues go to their grandkids, 20 and 30 years from now.
Interesting. So again, this is something that we're talking about on our CPA show because of the tax benefits. There are a lot of high net worth, high income taxpayers. We don't have the passive loss rules that apply. John, you mentioned that they're general partnerships, so that the passive loss rules don't apply. And so we're getting even somebody who's an employee, a high paid employee, we have the excess business loss limitations, but outside of that, we don't have the same limitations that we would have, say, in real estate or other passive investments. And so because of that, we get clients that are asking us all the time. And it's one thing to say, well, yes, effectively you get 40% of your money back. Almost day one, 30 to 40% of your money back almost day one, but you still have 60% of your money invested. Right. So it's very important. And I think, John, you've explained, obviously you're a huge fan. I mean, that comes through loud and clear, and that's fine. I mean, that's what we would expect from an oil guy. But we do need to understand that they are still putting in 60%, right? Absolutely. It's kind of like you don't tell a business owner to go out and buy a truck at the end of the year to get a bonus or a 179 deduction on the truck. They're still going to pay 60% of the cost of the truck. So right. You're still risking 60%. As you mentioned, it is a risky investment, which is actually why the government is saying we'll encourage you to do this by mitigating some of that risk. We'll take 40% of the risk off the table, basically day one or day two. And in exchange, you'll put that money into productive use where for oil that we need, rather than buying oil from Venezuela or buying oil from OPEC.
That is the key. And to that point, and again, I'm looking at putting solar panels on my house simply because I live in Texas and they're not building power plants, and we've had brownouts too. And I would love to be able to just not have to deal with any of that. So I'm all for all types of power. And I'm all for clean air and clean water and clean ground and everything. And if you ever get a chance to come up to the field, you'll see that these operators really take good care of the environment up there, as opposed to, if you can see a solar field and it's a pretty big scar that you can see from space, whereas a pad of 14 oil wells only takes up 5 acres and it's relatively clean. But to that point, bringing oil in from other countries when we have it right here, take the electric vehicles off the table. You've got your airplanes and your cargo ships. There are just oil freighters. There are approximately 8,000 oil freighters plying the seas at any given moment. And each one of those oil freighters burns anywhere from 30 to 60,000 gallons of fuel oil per day. So you start doing that kind of math, and they've got to come up with some other solutions. So it's not just our transportation. It's getting those Teslas, and it's getting those batteries, and it's getting everything coming from China and from India and from all over the world that we use on a daily basis. It's got to be put on a boat or some form of transport to get here, because we don't make it all here in America. So the more oil we can produce here, we produce it cleaner and better and more efficiently than anywhere else on the planet, right here in America.
So one thing you mentioned, which I think is very important, and I'd just like to finish talking about this, because I've told clients before, and I went to school in Texas. I went to school at UT. I took oil and gas the school in Texas, UT Austin, and so I've been involved in the oil and gas industry for my entire career, literally my entire career. So I'm a big, I am a big fan. I will admit I'm a big fan. I'd love to see it get cleaner and cleaner. But the one thing I find is, your industry is full of characters. Let me say, okay, that's the nice way to put it. But how would you talk about just how important it is who you deal with? Because in real estate, you can see the real estate. Oil, you don't get to see the oil. So right. You don't know really what's going to happen. You don't really know how good they are. I can evaluate a real estate deal. I can go to a 200 unit apartment complex, and I can see in my own eyes, here's the problems. It's pretty easy. That's, right. It's going to take me, 2-3 hours, and I can see that without too much difficulty, right? Oil can't do that. That is such a specialty engineering area that you'd really have to know so much, that you'd almost have to be an oil person, in order to do that. So how do you determine whether the people you're dealing with, the team you're dealing with, is actually legitimate and on the up and up? How do you do that?
A great question, and I'll use myself as an example. I grew up in the oil industry in Houston. I went out on my own and went into finance. And when I found this company, the first thing that the first thing out of their mouth was, we drill oil and gas wells, and there's risk involved. If we drill a dry hole, we don't make any money because no oil came out of the ground. And before I go through any economics as to why we're drilling these wells, you need to understand the risk. And that was the first thing that I thought, okay, this is different. It's not all rainbows and unicorns and we're going to be all millionaire oil tycoons. So that was the first thing. So I went to work here coming from a compliance background in the securities industry, and I looked this company up and down, and you've got to do the same thing. We even put out a red flag warning to look out for, because there are a lot of legitimate and good companies that do what we do and do things the right way. There's a lot of mom and pop shops that don't have the financial backing or the financial wherewithal. And those are the ones you kind of you really want to make sure who you're doing business with, not just from a good business standpoint. I mean, you can have a great, small operator who drills shallow wells and generates revenues for their partners. Not knocking them whatsoever. But in the oil industry, things can break, and everything that breaks is very expensive. And in some cases, you want to make sure you're doing business with someone who number one is doing business with some of the larger operators. So we primarily only work with your larger, or the biggest names in the field we work with. We help them drill some of their wells. So, but in the case of a smaller operator on a smaller rig, things can break and things can get expensive really fast. And so you just want to do your due diligence. I mean, there's really, one of the things I do is from time to time, 2 or 3 times a year, I will invite our partners to come up and look at some of the wells, because very much like real estate, there's no better way of seeing your money go to work for you than watching an oil well being drilled. And because, like I said, they come in and they build a small city around a bunch of holes in the ground until those wells start producing oil. So that's the ultimate way of checking them out. And not every operator is going to say, okay, Mr. Tire Kicker, I understand you want to do your due diligence. They're not going to put you on a plane and fly you out to see one of their oil wells. You're going to have to do a little bit of that due diligence on your own. Better Business Bureau is that's one of the easiest ways to check out a company, just for the sake of ease. Checking them out, making sure they have good reviews, that they do business the right way, and then go from there. Most companies will provide you with financials, or some they're done in Bradstreet reports. Just make sure you're doing with most secretaries of state. Like, we're based in Texas, the Texas Secretary of State. We're a legitimate business. So I mean, we have offices in Boise, Idaho, here in Dallas, Texas. So just buyer beware, just like any investment. Make sure you at least have some warm and fuzzies about who you're doing business with.
Well, I think it's particularly important in oil and gas business, just because I do think there are people who will fake it. Mm-hmm. They will absolutely fake it. I've seen it. And like you say, you can, I've actually had experiences where you absolutely know the oil is there and you can't get to the oil. Yep. So there are lots of risks. And so when we talk to our clients, on the one hand, we need to be careful not to say no just because we don't understand it. Because it is a team sport. Remember, investing is always a team sport. So we need to make sure that we understand what's going on. If our clients are coming to us with an oil and gas investment, we need to understand the oil and gas industry. We need to understand that, yes, our job is primarily to explain the tax effects, but I think our clients are looking for a little bit more than that, and a little bit understanding of, okay, how does this investment work? And while we're not the ones who are evaluating the investment for them, typically, we should be able to read that operating agreement. We should be able to read that offering memorandum and say, this is what the deal is. We've got some of this money, goes to the royalty owners. They get this percentage off the top, which I know is a very big range depending on where you're drilling.
Right.
It can go up to 25%, right?
28% in some parts of the country.
28%. It's 28%. And that's right off the top. So you're getting the leftover and you're paying all the costs of developing. And so you do need to understand what is going on, because it's one thing to say, I know what a truck is, and you know what the risks are of buying your truck. All right. Oil and gas is a little bit different animal. It's a little more sophisticated investment. Typically, I think most oil and gas drillers are syndicators, and so you're talking about accredited investors, and basically all the an accredited investor means is that you can afford to lose the money. That's right. Really all that means. Doesn't mean that your clients know any more than anybody else. It just means that the government has determined that they have enough money that if they lose money, it's okay. And so I think that's important to recognize also. I'm glad, John, that you guys, put out those red flags. You could lose everything. Just know that you could lose everything. I would just encourage you, don't scare away your client because you don't understand it. Rather, help to understand it, find people who do understand it, get a good team in place. If they are going to do it, make sure that they do understand what they're getting into.
Right. And to those points, we only work with accredited investors for those specific reasons. Not just from a tax standpoint. If they've got to make enough money that they can fully utilize all the tax advantages that are available to them. From the same point, someone who is a retired person that may not need all the tax advantages, they may be looking to supplement their income in retirement. But one more thing on the front of checking out who you're doing business with. In almost every case, if you're going to be participating in an oil well, one of the easiest things to find out is every oil well, if it's permitted, is going to have an API number. So that's like the address of a piece of real estate or the deed. They're going to have an API number. They'll typically have a plat so that you can look and say, okay, this is a legitimate well that these people are drilling. They're a working interest partner through the various agreements. It should be easy for that promoter or whoever's sending this project to your client for them to prove that they are a part of this well and not just some fly-by-night, working in a basement in Nigeria. Company. So there are ways of verifying it, and it should be pretty easy for any company that if it's not easy for them, your antenna should be on high alert.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And John, where could we get more information about what you guys do?
We're easy to find on the web, just www.gulfcoastwestern.com. It's literally almost every letter in the alphabet, but it's our company name. And we have a lot of information, a lot of informative videos. Beyond that, if you're interested, you can submit through our website, request for more information, and we'll be happy to work with you and get you anything you need.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John, for joining us. And thank you, everybody who's joined us today. I think when we're talking to our clients, we've got to understand not just the tax side of things, but we need to understand what they're getting into, not because we're advising them whether or not to get into it, but because we need to have a general understanding so that we can help them find good partners. They can find, they can know what they're looking for. We don't have to be the experts. We have to be the tax experts, but we can have people around us and people we know who do have that kind of information. And that's why we bring these type of people like John, to you so that you can get more information should your clients inquire. I think that when we do this, when we're really doing the things the government has said they want us to do, such as invest in oil and gas, that's a clear indication when you get those big tax benefits that the government is saying, you do this, we'll give you a tax benefit because we know that we need the energy in the U.S. And we may not need it forever. We may not need all of it forever, but we certainly need it now. And when we do that, we're always going to end up with better clients and a better practice and a better life. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the WealthAbility for CPAs show. Better clients, better practice, better life. To learn more, go to wealthability.com.